The details of an unsolved crime committed 15 years ago in the west of Ireland are outlined now with the hope that this cold case can still be solved.
When a murder is unsolved, there can be no resolution for the family of the victim. When the crime has no apparent motive, the unanswered questions can haunt a community. For hard-working Galway woman Eileen Costello O'Shaughnessy, a merciless crime was to place her at the centre of a murder investigation which has mystified the local Gardaí and population for years. On the 30th of November 1997, 3 bakery workers from Galway found an abandoned taxi outside their workplace. Believing it was a stolen vehicle, the men decided to move the car to a safer position, but quickly discovered signs of something more sinister.
This crime first came to the attention of the Garda when an employee of Leyden House Bakery phoned the communications room at Mill Street station in Galway to the effect that a taxi was in front of the bakery. It was parked. The keys were in the ignition, and he reported that there was blood on the seat of the car and on the armrest. Garda Pat Nugent and Garda Kelleher went to the scene, and they found the car as was reported. From that point on, they knew that they were dealing with a very serious incident.
Gardaí were quick to preserve the scene. Meanwhile, officers were making inquiries as to the identity of the taxi's driver.
The Gardaí established that Eileen Costello O'Shaughnessy was the driver of the car that evening.
In 1997, Eileen Costello O'Shaughnessy was 47 years old and living with her mother in Corrafin, following an amicable separation from her husband.
When Eileen moved in with my mother, they had a very easy relationship. The one painful thing for my mother was that Eileen had very severe Crohn's disease, and so I think it pained my mother to see her in so much pain. But near the end, she had found a way to control the pain, and my mother obviously took joy out of the fact that she was getting on with her life.
It was nice for Grant to have company, and the two of them were very close, but they got on extremely well, except when the two of them were in the kitchen cooking, because a woman is always dominant in the kitchen.
If you'd met them and called in to visit them, you'd swear Mum had lived all her life with Gran. They were that comfortable and knew each other's routines really well.
As well as being an attentive daughter, Eileen was also a devoted mother with 2 adult children.
Eileen was real fun as a mother. She got married at age 20 and her 2 children were born while she was still in her early 20s. So in a way she grew up with her kids insofar as the age gap was not so great.
Yeah, I was still very close to Mum, even though at the time I was 24, but she was the real Irish mother. I was still her baby, even though I was a fully grown adult.
You were just a regular mother-daughter, and that's boring but just really normal, and that's what I miss.
Eileen tried her hand at many jobs over the years, including hairdressing and sales, but in her mid-40s she decided she was ready for a change.
Eileen started to drive a taxi about 4 years before she died. She was very happy at that job. She couldn't get enough of road.
Mum got into the taxi industry through a friend of hers, and that kind of job really suited her because she was a talker and she liked mixing with people, and she just liked to be out and about. She didn't like to be confined to the one spot.
One family member said that it was the ideal job because she had a captive audience for talking, and she did love it from the very beginning.
She was very, very meticulous about her work. She would account for the mileage and make sure that all the fares were totted up and up to date.
I was quite chuffed for her and kind of about it, because she was telling me I think it was one of 12 women doing it. So quite an unusual job for a female to be doing 15, 16, 17 years ago.
I think she much preferred doing the days than the nights. The hours were not antisocial. I think maybe subconsciously as well there might have been an element of safety in that as well, and that perhaps it was safer, or so she thought, to drive a taxi during the day.
Sunday the 30th of November was just another working day for Eileen. But as the evening wore on and she failed to clock off her shift, alarm bells began to ring.
And that night, I think it was her boss, Christy O'Neill, that rang. He had been waiting in the Dyke Road for hours, waiting to swap the care, and she hadn't turned up.
It was soon after that cab number 34 was located in an abandoned state at Lydon's Bakery.
At this point, it was a missing persons investigation, but we realised, having found the blood on the car, that it was a very serious matter.
The local area was searched in order to establish if Eileen had left the car as a result of a serious assault having taken place on her, and in order to establish that she hadn't wandered away. So those searches were completed, but they also failed to locate Eileen at that particular time.
There was no sleep that night whatsoever, but at all times we feared the worst with all the blood that was in the care.
The family's worst fears were confirmed around midday the next afternoon, when her body was discovered by a farmer in Tinkers Lane.
By noon today, the body of Eileen Costello O'Shaughnessy, a married woman with 2 adult children, had been found by a farmer in a laneway at Knockdoe Moor, 10 miles outside Galway City on the Tuam Road. Over 60 detectives are now involved in the intense investigation, but as they began their crime conference tonight, the motive in this case was still a mystery.
On discovery of the body of Eileen Costello O'Shaughnessy, we now had 2 scenes.
So both scenes were examined, and a full technical examination was conducted by the Garda Technical Bureau.
The search revealed that a very vicious attack had taken place in the car, and whoever had been in the car made a quick getaway from it.
The keys were left in the ignition, and this possibly would indicate that the person or persons involved were in a state of panic.
There was a bum bag on the floor on the driver's side, and in addition to that, there was a plastic container with coins in it.
A certain amount of cash was found in her car, so that certainly would indicate that the persons involved didn't steal the money from her. So as regards an exact and particular motive, it's difficult to establish what exactly happened.
Eileen Costello O'Shaughnessy's body was removed from the scene to University College Hospital, where a full post-mortem was conducted by Professor Harbison.
The results of the post-mortem indicated that Eileen had been subjected to a severe physical assault on her person as a result of a blunt instrument, and she had little or no opportunity to defend herself from this assault.
As the Gardaí continued their investigation, Eileen's family were trying to come to terms with the brutality of her murder.
We couldn't believe it, that such a thing had happened so close to home. And she hadn't any enemies, or we just didn't know what went horribly wrong.
In Galway City tonight, the festive lights may be flashing out the Christmas message, but the mood here is extremely sombre. People shocked by the brutal killing of the popular taxi driver have been expressing their grief and sense of disbelief with floral tributes.
Well, this is a very disturbing murder in that the victim was subjected to quite considerable violence before she met her death. We believe That a lot of that occurred within the car while she was probably driving it, or at the scene where she was subsequently found.
Here in the little village of Corofin, where Eileen Costello O'Shaughnessy lived, there's a deep sense of shock and outrage today that she could have met her death in such brutal circumstances just a few miles from her home.
You're just angry. You just want to, at the time, you just want to get that person. And you'd be thinking you want to do the same thing to them because you're so angry about it.
You're sitting there in your home, surrounded by your family, and all these people have been really, really kind. And you're just sitting there thinking, my mum's dead. My mum's dead.
I knew she was gone. But it's only when I went out to Gran's house and saw Gran and saw the state of Gran in the face, look on her face, that's when it hits home.
It was like she had shrunk by about a foot. And she was this little, tiny woman. And you could tell the stuff had just been knocked out of her.
The firstborn in the family was a girl who died at aged a number of months. So here was a mother who had 2 daughters, now both of them dead before her. So she spent like the first several days or a week in so much shock, I think she hardly knew what happened.
I just said to Gran, well, I said, will I move in with you? And she said, yeah. And I spent 6 years in with Gran, but I'd say the first month or 2, to be honest with you, I don't know what we talked about, but we were just there for one another and kept one another going. But she was a very strong lady, like. She lived for 11 years. I think it was in hope of finding out who did it, but she just died of old age and a broken heart.
I think that's the hardest thing. She never got her answer. And she should have had an answer.
The challenge for the police is that there's no known motive, and solving a murder case, the start point always is, what is the motive? And without any obvious motive, it is hard to tell.
It wasn't a sexually motivated crime as far as we understand. There's no evidence to suggest that. There was, Mum's coin jar was left in the car, which is, there was pounds and 50p coins. There's a lot of money. That was left. So kind of out and out robbery, you would take all the money, everything.
Meanwhile, Gardaí had garnered further evidence that robbery had not been a primary motive.
It was late 1997 that Gardaí got information which showed that people had actually been at Eileen's car before the bakery workers were at the car, before the alarm was actually raised.
In the course of the investigation, it came to our knowledge that youths passed the car while it was parked in front of Eilen's bakery. One of them put their hand in through the driver's window, which was open, and stole Eileen's phone and cigarettes.
These teenagers later told Gardaí that they had taken Eileen's phone and that the battery wasn't working. So they basically smashed her phone and left it a couple of 100 yards away from the car.
As part of the ongoing investigation, Gardaí pieced together a timeline of Eileen's movements on the day of her murder.
Eileen's first job that day was a pick-up out in the western suburb of Rahoon. She then got a fare from the Headford Road heading down to the train station. She was then back out past the university out to Supermax in Newcastle to bring somebody to Supermax in Eyre Square. So she had quite a busy morning. And then at around midday, she found herself back out towards the Corofin area.
While in Corofin, Eileen met a friend for lunch before calling home to check on her mother. While she was there, they received a welcome visitor.
The last one of us that was talking to Eileen on the day was my son. He came back from Australia that day and he met Eileen back at my mother's house.
And she then heads back into Galway City to continue the rest of her day.
At 2:30, she met her friend and they went to the Skiffington Arms where they had a cup of tea and spoke for a while.
Hiya! How are you?
I'm
not so bad.
It's the last day of November, looking ahead to Christmas. She's talking about her nephew Kenny Costello coming back from Australia that very day, and also talking about her own daughter Susan, who's in Australia on a trip. She lives in London, but she's over in Australia. Eileen's looking forward to Susan coming back for Christmas.
I jokingly said to her, you'll get something small back from Australia. It'll be your Christmas present and your holiday present because we'll be broke, and, things like that.
Eileen left the Skeffington Arms and returned to her car on Eyre Square. She continued taking fares for the rest of the afternoon until around 6 p.m, when she was picked up on the CCTV camera at Supermax.
She just goes to the ladies' toilet in Supermax, and she gets herself a drink as well, and she comes back out of Supermax and continues on her work. At this stage, she only has less than 2 hours work to do before she can give back over the car at Dyke Road, get her own car and head back home to Corrafin. So she's on the home stretch almost of her day's work.
We know that at 7:30 p.m. Eileen picked up her last known fare, and then people have come forward and have been interviewed by the Gardaí.
At 7:59 p.m, she goes to ring home to her mum, Nora. The call never connects. Perhaps she had dialed the number and then hung up because somebody was hailing down a cab at that stage, or perhaps the signal went, or her battery didn't work, that the phone never rang on the other end for Nora to pick it up. Maybe there's nothing untoward in this, but it's just something that's unexplained.
Eileen Costello O'Shaughnessy was last seen here at Eyre Square at about 8:30 last night when she phoned the company she worked for, Galway Taxis, and told them she was going to take a fare to Clare Galway. As a rule, she kept in regular contact with the company and with the owner of the car she drove. But when she wasn't heard from for over an hour, they became concerned and raised the alarm.
It's a very short window then between Eileen's last contact with the taxi company and the discovery of the taxi at the bakery. So in that brief period of time, Eileen had met her attacker and unfortunately had received her fatal injuries.
The investigation would show that Eileen died between 8 and 10 p.m. on the 30th of November 1997. Gardaí therefore compiled a list of sightings of her taxi during that time period.
At about 8 p.m, we have a sighting of Eileen's car at the junction of Cross Street, and she was talking to a woman. This woman has not come forward.
Although it is uncertain how many passengers were in the taxi at this point, the sightings mapped Eileen's car moving from Eyre Square to the Tuam Galway Road around 8 p.m. A short time later, a crucial sighting placed Eileen's car at Holmes Hill, 3 miles outside Galway. The vehicle was stopped along the hard shoulder with its lights on, and the taxi sign was illuminated.
The next sighting we have of Eileen's car is turning right at the Mystical Rose nursing home. This is at the junction of the Tuam Galway Road and Tinker's Lane. The unusual thing about this is the taxi turned right without giving a signal.
It is still unknown if the attack had already begun by the time the taxi reached Tinker's Lane, but it was here that Eileen was to die alone in the muddy Boreen.
As a result of the forensic examination of the taximeter, we know that the last fare that Eileen carried, the car travelled between 16 and 17 miles. That told us that the car had travelled from roughly Eyre Square out to the Boreen and Tinker's Lane.
The taxi was driven back from Tinker's Lane, back along the N17 at around 9 o'clock that night, and the killer was driving that car. There were a number of reported sightings of a taxi driving erratically a silver-coloured Carina being driven back towards Galway, One learner driver specifically remembered it close to Tinker's Lane because they themselves had to pull in out of the way because the car was driving above the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit.
A further witness stated that they'd seen a silver taxi driving erratically in the Castlegar area around 9 p.m.
The taxi, which at this stage was close to Fleming's roundabout, turned into Leyden House. As it turned in, the lady got a look at the driver. She described the man as between 30 and 50 years of age with a dark-coloured beard. He was not a big man. He had dark hair and appeared to her to have a flat face.
Another perhaps crucial witness is a man who was locking up a shop across the road from Leyden's Bakery around 9 o'clock. He looks across the road and he sees a man getting down off a wall.
This man was in his 20s. He was 5'10", 5'11". He had red, short hair. He was average build. He had a number of days' growth of beard. This man had in his hand a cream or beige sports bag with two canvas handles.
We can assume that that man getting down off the wall is quite possibly the person who was driving the car, which was abandoned at Leyden's Bakery at around that time.
Another witness saw a young man in the field behind his house at around 9:10 that evening.
He was walking in the direction of Tirlin and appeared lost. The witness was surprised that the man was walking in the field, considering that it was a wet night and he could have been on the footpath.
The area in which the taxi was seen being driven very erratically that night is a very, very busy area. And while a number of people have come forward and assisted the investigation, there is little doubt that there are other people out there who know exactly who was involved in the murder of Eileen Costello O'Shaughnessy, and I would certainly appeal to those to come forward and assist us in bringing the case to a resolution.
When I think about Eileen and her life, I always think of somebody that was very cheerful and very busy and very talkative.
She loved dancing and country and western music. That was her main thing. And she also loved playing cards, 25. She wasn't really a drinker. She would have a drink. She liked a brandy, but like she was virtually a pioneer. It was all about dancing.
When I think about my mum, you know, I try to think really hard about the good things, but it always comes back to what happened. If I had an answer as to who and, you know, why, I could then at least start to kind of, I suppose, lay her to rest in my head.
There's no such thing as a perfect murder. The murderer always does make some mistakes, and all that has to be done to solve the case is to take advantage of that mistake. So at the moment I feel more optimistic than I did any time in the last 15 years, I think. Somehow I think somebody will step up and with information that will solve it.
I've no doubt but that the person who murdered Eileen was covered in her blood from the attack, and whoever that was then walked home somewhere in Galway.
Someone would have to notice a behavioural change in that person, like, are there clothes that they wore that night that have to have discarded them, that there be a jacket missing, a cap missing, whatever. We just need someone from the public to come forward and give that information.
Well, if anyone knows anything, I'd love if they would come forward. But at this stage now, all we can do is hope.
Ma'am is gone and she's never going to come back. But I don't want any other family to have to go through that. And if we can save someone else's life, it'll be worth it.
If it's somebody who knows about it, whether it was a mother or a sister or girlfriend, boyfriend, whomever, whatever, and even if they were afraid, it's 15 years down the road, maybe now they've got the freedom, the chance, or they don't feel threatened anymore, but come forward and tell us. Put us out of this misery. Because it's not something anybody should have to go through. I just want to say goodbye to my mum.
And next week, the details surrounding the disappearance and murder of a young lady following a concert in the summer of 1987 is re-examined at the same time of 9:35, next Tuesday.